Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the MGA podcast, the Modern Golden Age podcast. And today I have with me the one and only Ulkar Aghayeva. And the first question is that how we pronounce your surname or did I just say it wrong?
Yeah. So the correct pronunciation is Ulkar Aghayeva
Oh,
in
Ulkar.
Azerbaijani.
Okay.
Yeah.
Aghayeva.
But
Okay.
yeah, in English it's more like Ulkar Aghayeva. Yeah, and
Oh,
that's fine
perfect.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? Because like most people who don't they cannot pronounce João, so they just say João, and I'm just perfectly fine with that. But have you like do you have any problem with that, or you just accept it?
I think I've gotten used to it. So
Yeah.
Ulkar is totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So Ulka, we've met at this salon that you organized. That was beautifully organized, by the way. Congratulations on
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
About music and literature, and I definitely want to talk about that. But my first question is, how did you ended up being part of the intellect community?
Right. So like so many things in the past years, this became possible thanks to Twitter, one way or another. So I knew about the existence of Interintellect salons for maybe like a couple of years, and I actually participated in one organized by Lisa Khan, the Army, on
Yeah.
speeding up golden ages. So that was, I think, the only salon that I attended before. But a couple of months ago, I met the founder of Interintellect, Anna
And
Gatt, here in New
yeah.
York. Yeah, and we just talked a bit about my work in music, and um, I knew then that I also want to host a salon, but I wasn't yet sure what the subject was going to be about. But then, one by one, pieces started coming together, and um, so initially the idea was to host salons discussing the art of composing, so the
Mhm.
process of composition of classical music.
Yeah.
But then I thought it would be really nice to, first of all, to invite my musicians that I know to this salon to co-host with me. But also I have some writer friends, um, and one of them is also a musician. So there's a lot of intersections,
Yeah.
so that we collaborate and not just talk about music, but also parallels in the creative process of writing both music and literature. And it seems like it's a very fertile ground. And the first time we gathered to talk about, um, the salon series, because we knew that we cannot just put everything in one salon. So it's going to be a series of them. Yeah, just things kept coming up, and yeah, there's so much to cover, and I'm glad that we already have two of those salons, like as introduction to the subject,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to the next ones.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to the second one, but I went to the first one, and I absolutely loved it. So
Thank you.
and how did you feel about being asked to be a guest? Is because for the folks who are listening and don't know what intellect is about, it's a community that arranges this intellectual debate in salons about different topics. And how did you feel about being a host? Like, was that uh, natural to you? Were you somehow scared? Because I had the invitation to be a host, and I was really scared, so I said no. But I'm really curious about how did you feel about it?
Oh, I think, yeah, I was totally excited about it. I already had some ideas, even like before I knew about the existence of Interintellect Salon. I had ideas about organizing kind of hybrid events where there is a mini lecture followed by music, where we explore parallels between music and other human endeavors. So like this is kind of the very idea of it is not kind of new to me. I was thinking of doing that, but that was before the pandemic, so that kind of got canceled.
Yeah.
And then finally, it became possible in the form of the intellect salon. So um, and I think like the key thing about the salons is that you're not expected to be an expert in a field.
Yeah.
Right? It's yeah, like it's nice if you you know, have some points to make, and some points of discussion that you want to bring to the table, but it's all about participation. It's all about conversation.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's even more because, you know, salons as we know them, they were in person, right? It's only now that we're either we have no choice but do them online, or in a way it's good because we can connect to people on different parts of the globe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that we don't have to be in the same place. But like when we are in the same place, it's a completely different experience, of course. So yeah, I mean, I'm really, really glad that this is happening, and this is also, I would say, something that is a manifestation of a golden age, you could say, because people have interest in this, people have things to say, people have things to share, and then sometimes there are collaborations germinating and developing from meetings that happen at these salons. So it's not only a place to like to share your opinions or tell stories that you have to tell, but also to connect to people, and then who knows, maybe that can carry over to other projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, you did a very, very good job, because I was really, when I went there, I was really curious about, I actually thought that we were focusing more on the creative process, but then what happened was we ended up having all this discussion about different art forms and how music can complement the writing part, and writing part can actually with music and the relationship. And you show this beautiful music that I've recorded, but I cannot pronounce the name. Can you please say it, like the song that you showed us?
Sure. The first recording that we listened to was Samuel Barber's Knoxville, Summer of 1915. So it's a piece for a soprano or mezzo soprano and orchestra.
Yeah.
And this is a very unusual work because you know, we think of composition as a long process that it can take weeks and months and years sometimes, for especially for like large scale works. But this particular piece, I think the composer himself was very intentional about being very spontaneous about his own process of writing, because the piece, the literary piece that's it's based on, was also a result of improvisation. It was kind of stream of consciousness kind of writing. And then he took the last third of that short story and wrote music to it. And like, I think he completed it. So the story itself was written within an hour and a half or so. And then it took him 3 days to write music to it. And this is a huge accomplishment because it's a very complex score. It's gorgeous, and it's very I think it makes a huge difference when you just read it in your own voice, the story, versus when you listen to it rendered in music. And the music highlights different points in the narration that you probably wouldn't, you know, pay so much attention to, or they wouldn't have that salience, but they're hugely amplified by the music.
Yeah. So did you find out that specific piece when you were getting ready to the salon, or did you already knew it?
Yeah, so I was introduced to it by a student who was working in my lab. She's a violist in addition to being a biologist, and I don't remember how we came to discuss this piece, but she told me that I should definitely listen to it. And so I did, and I think it was January of 2020, and I was enamored by it. I was totally blown away. I was listening to it on repeat many times. So like, I think there are many pieces of classical music that I somehow happened upon, or that were more rarely recommended to me, that they for some time they become an obsession. So I have to listen to different performances, different recordings, and if I get a chance also to listen to them live, and just like savor the the entirety of the piece and all its details. So like this is for sure, this is one of those pieces.
Yeah, can you name just a few more, like two or three? Because like I'll give you an example. To me, that was The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. I remember the first time that I heard
Oh,
that, I was
yeah,
completely blown away. I actually
yeah.
I heard that when I was in college, and we used to have like these moments where we would schedule a room in the university, and we bring not no instruments were allowed, because I was studying music back then in college, right? And
Mhm,
so no
mhm,
instruments were allowed. The only thing that we could bring was like a CD or an iPod, and we connected to the speakers, and we would just listen to music. And
mhm,
we did that with jazz. And I remember that once there was like this classical musician that ended up going with us and told us like, oh, I really enjoyed those rhythmic figures, and you should, and speaking of rhythm, you should listen to this specific
mhm,
song by
mhm,
Stravinsky. I remember listening to it, and I was so blown away that the next day we're about to do that ritual of going to listen to music. I actually booked another room all by myself with another speaker just to
mhm,
listen to the whole song from the
mhm.
beginning to the end. And I was completely blown away. It's still one of my favorites, one of my favorite classical musical pieces. And I would love to hear what are some of yours.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, for sure. First of all, I can totally relate to your experience, because yeah, it's an incredibly rich work.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, for me, yeah, I would say that I had also like, yeah, periods of obsession with particular composers or pieces. And one thing that, like, among my recent finds, so there is this Ravel's piano trio,
Mhm.
and specifically the third movement of it, which is, if you look at the score, it's very simple, but at the same time, it's incredibly powerful.
Mm.
So it's just very sparse language. This is what I'm learning as a composer, that you can use very sparse language and yet achieve incredibly powerful results.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Another is, so I was listening to a lot of piano trios recently, because I'm working on one myself. So another one is, so Shostakovich has two piano trios. One of them is just like one movement, is more like a poem kind of work, and the other one, it has four parts, four movements, and yeah, I mean, it's incredible in its entirety. But again, the third movement is one that, it somehow has a similar um, structure and mood to the Ravel's, um, the third movement of
Mhm.
Ravel's piano trio. Um, so that's something that I was completely smitten by. And then, if we go back to like earlier music, I also really love medieval and Renaissance music, even
Mhm.
before going to Bach, even before the Baroque. And there is this Flemish French composer, Josquin de Prez, um, and he has written a lot of masses and more secular works. And there's
Mhm.
one mass that I completely adore, and I don't know how many times I've listened to it, performed by the Tallis scholars,
Mhm.
and it's called Missa Pange Lingua. Um, so it's based on a Gregorian chant that was ascribed to Thomas Aquinas.
Mhm.
Um, but the mass itself, it's just mind blowing. Yeah, and I think it really matters uh, how it's performed, because I also listened to a couple of other performances of it. But the Tallis scholars, they're truly masters of early music. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I can go on and on.
No,
There
yeah.
are a lot of pieces like this. Yeah,
Yeah, but one of the
yeah,
things that you just mentioned, and of course I want to talk about composing, since you're a composer, you're also a biologist, and we need to talk about
yeah,
all those different things. But one
yeah.
of the things that you just mentioned was like that was one of the things that I had to learn about classical music, because I came from jazz, and when
Mm,
you're playing jazz, like the person who's playing matters a lot, because it will
mm,
play a completely different thing. Like if
mm,
it's me and another guitar player, and we're both playing, my solo would be completely different of his. And in my
Mhm.
mind, I always thought that well, classical music, it's, and I'm sorry, but I thought that I used to say like that's so boring because everyone will play it the same way. I know that if I listen to that song, it'll be always the same thing. And then when I had real connection with classical music and classical musicians that played at a very good level, I was blown away by how stupid I had been because it makes the whole difference. Like the same piece played by two different players will be completely different.
Yeah, yeah, for
And
sure. Yeah.
that's something that and making a segue to composer, that's usually something like for me when I wrote music, I usually wrote a lot of jazz tunes, and I had the privilege to be able to write to specific musicians because they were the ones who playing with me, and I knew how a certain piano player would approach music and how a certain drummer would approach music, and I was able to compose to those. But when you're playing like when you're actually writing classical music, I believe, I'm not sure, and you'll probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you cannot do that. So entering in the composition world, how do you deal with that? Like how you deal with that ambiguity? I think that's how you say it.
Hmm. Hmm.
By that is related to who's playing your own composition.
Yeah, I would say first of all, yeah, indeed, there is a world of difference in how different musicians interpret classical pieces.
Yeah.
Um, and like you can see that difference among contemporaries, but also if you take like a historical view, how music was performed, let's say in the beginning of the 20th century, from the time that we have recordings from, and compare them to these days recordings, there's an enormous difference. And some people say that, oh, because there is such a huge demand on technical precision and like generally technicality, so recordings of today are more polished, but somehow they're more alike than if you look at recordings from um, earlier times. And then you can immediately identify, oh, this is Glenn Gould playing, this is Horowitz playing, or this is Richter playing, without even like looking at the you know on the CD or vinyl
The
or whatever
cover.
you're listening to.
Yeah.
Um, but like in my own work, I don't really, I don't have that in mind while I'm writing, to be honest, because I'm writing music, right? I don't
Hmm.
really write for musicians in that sense.
Hmm.
Maybe like later I would have to take this into account, but also I'm happy to see how different people would interpret my music. I have opinions about how it should be played,
Hmm.
right? And when we were recording my first suite for cello and piano, we had a lot of discussion with my teacher. He was actually the one who played the cello part, so that was really nice because he has seen me write this piece from start to finish,
Hmm.
and we were having a lot of discussions about how this um, yeah, like a lot of decisions along the way. Um, so he was more familiar with the piece from the beginning.
Hmm.
Um, so I would say that that's not too much on my mind, and I'm interested in how different people would interpret, especially also, of course, you can make you know notes, annotation, in a way that um, conveys your intentions about the piece, but also um, the good thing is that I can talk to the musicians in
Of
person,
course.
and then we can discuss how the thing should be played.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how did you end up composing? So, how tell us a little bit about your relationship with music, and then specifically with composing.
Yeah, this is a pretty recent thing in my life, composing. So not music in general, but composing, because um, so my mom is a violinist, and she was trained as a violinist, and she used to teach for some time. But then um, she let me play piano instead. She didn't. I don't think. Yeah, it never came up as an option for me to learn other instruments, to be honest. But I was already enamored by piano. And so I started learning at the age of 6. And at some point, I have considered becoming a professional musician, but then I think I was also very strongly drawn to sciences, and so I made a decision in favor of sciences. And then, yeah, while I was in college, there wasn't really much time to practice. So for some time, I was mostly a listener rather than performer. But then I came back to performing, and when I moved to New York, I found that a really nice teacher, and with her, yeah, like she definitely deepened my understanding and my analytical ability with respect to music, piano music, first of all. So yeah, I learned a lot of Russian Romanticism with her, and also a lot of Bach. And then at some point, I got really interested in early music, as I mentioned, but not only vocal music, but also, you know, the instruments from those olden times, like lute and harpsichord. So I took a couple of lessons in harpsichord, which is a completely magical instrument. It's very different from piano. It's a completely different thing. And yeah, so like I would have continued those lessons had it not been for a pandemic, to be honest, but I had to give that up. And then I think the major turning point in my life was this one concert that I attended, and I remember the day to this day. It was August 14th, 2019, and it was a house concert. So it wasn't like a traditional stage performance, but a place where it was still quite a large audience, but it was way more informal, and also you could approach musicians and talk to them. It was very different from traditional stage performance. And those were 4 cellists from Juilliard, and the pieces that they play and their mastery just completely blew me away. And I just felt some kind of stirring of a movement inside me that I just couldn't remain passive with respect to this experience. It just urged me to do something about it, because it has such an intense effect on me. And so that's when I first thought that I want to write music. And I think I think I kind of grew up thinking that because all of the music I've been hearing was so astounding and had such a strong emotional effect on me, I just couldn't conceive that I could ever write anything like that, right? I was just overwhelmed by the experience. And I guess it wasn't part of my upbringing that, oh yes, like writing music is something that you can do, right? Just like writing stories, or like, I don't know, learning biology or whatever. So yeah, it wasn't a part of my upbringing, unfortunately. So I just kept collecting musical experiences throughout my life, and then at some point they just like coalesced and precipitated in this like very like crisp decision to start writing music myself. And I think one reason why I felt compelled to do it, and also felt like I could do it, is because I found like a little niche in which I could express myself, which I thought that hasn't been explored before from what I knew. And that is the intersection between Azerbaijani traditional music, which is called Mugham, with more like traditional Western Baroque music forms. So like maybe I should tell a little bit more about Mugham.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a very it's a very storied kind of musical tradition, and it is an amalgam of many influences, as is pretty much all the culture of Azerbaijan, I would say, because the country, what it is, Azerbaijan now, has been a part of empires that were just following each other throughout centuries. And so there is a strong Arabic influence, and also a tradition of bards, that is traveling musicians, which is similar to what was happening in Greece and Eastern Europe, and I think all over the place.
Yeah.
But it's a very distinct style of singing, which is microtonal.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there are specific instruments that are either pluck strings or bowed strings, or percussion instruments, and Mugham can be performed both as a with a solo instrument or voice, or in the form of an ensemble. And when it's performed solo, the thing about it is that it's unmetered, so it doesn't have a fixed rhythm. It feels more like a narration. It has a very it feels like a speech. It's feels like someone is telling you a story, like very much more literally than other kinds of music may seem. And it's based on a modal system. So there are 7 main modes that express different moods. And
so the question, are they at all related with our Western modes, or are they completely different?
Not really.
Oh,
not
awesome.
Really. Yeah, I mean, maybe there is some semblance to the Indian raga.
Okay.
Yeah, but so they can express different moods, but it's not just like major and minor scales, right? It's a bit, there are different tones that are used in each scale, including microtonal, like quarter tones.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I grew up with this music, but I think as a child I was rather overwhelmed by it because it's so intense and incredibly emotional. So I grew up in its presence, but I haven't really, I didn't really explore it in depth at the time. But then maybe also living abroad for such a long time, it made me homesick, and I found myself just returning to, the recordings that I could find, and just absorbing it and like rediscovering it essentially. But also, in the 20th century, when Azerbaijan became part of the Soviet Union, so there was a big influence of Russian musical school, and there are like several prominent Azerbaijani composers who initiated the tradition of classical Azerbaijani music, which is very much drawing upon Mugham tradition, but also uses Western forms. Like there is a Mugham opera, there are symphonic Mughams, there's chamber works that you are using Mugham harmonies, but they're not really microtonal anymore. But they have a very distinct harmonic profile, let's say. And so I love that music. I very much resonate with it, and I thought that, I'm not aware of any compositions that try to marry Mugham with Baroque musical forms, let's say with fugues. And like I really love polyphonic music. I spend like countless hours listening to all of the things that Bach wrote and other contrapuntal works by other composers. So this form also really resonates with me because of its richness and complexity, and because it's so expressive. And so I thought, let me try to write a Mugham fugue. I don't think anyone has done that before. And so I started writing my draft, and then I reached out to one of those musicians that I met in that fateful concert. And he gave me a very encouraging feedback. But like at that time, it was like fall of 2019. I didn't really finish that piece that I started. Right, I just wrote one page, and it was kind of a draft. And that was the time when I was, applying for jobs in academia. So it was like a lot of my energy was spent on that. So I kind of had to like, put a hold on it on my musical project. And then of course, pandemic happened, and like everything changed a lot, and I joined a new lab, so I settled a little bit professionally. And then I felt like, oh, music is coming back to me. It really wants to, be expressed from me somehow. Um, and so I reached again to one of those musicians, and now he's my teacher. And I started actually taking first lessons in jazz improvisation and theater, because I thought,
awesome.
yeah, there is actually a whole fusion genre called jazz Mugham, and there's like a pioneer Azerbaijani pianist, Vagif Mustafazadeh, who just created a whole new genre from ground up.
Awesome.
And I also I grew up listening to his music. I'm very much inspired by his work as well. And so I thought, okay, I want to maybe explore this instead of more classical forms. And it was a very fertile, like very productive period for me when my teacher told me a lot about, jazz theory, and we analyzed a lot of pieces, and I tried to improvise on some chord progressions. But then at some point, it was, I think, December of 2020, I thought that, I think I want to return to that fugue that I started writing and see where it takes me.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, somehow it just happened. I wrote it within a month. I finished it within a month. And I think it there was kind of a necessity in writing it. It kind of poured out of me, and it was challenging. It was hard. It wasn't easy, but it felt very good. I've never it was a completely different kind of joy that I haven't experienced even as a researcher or doing pretty much anything in my life. So that was incredibly uplifting and very fulfilling.
Yeah. So how did do you think that the fact that you were that amount of time not only playing music, but then when you did come back to music, you approached more an improvised version of it. Do you think that helped with composing? Because I remember that when I was composing, and of course I didn't compose to in a classical sense. I compose more jazz tunes and songs and that kind of music, even though I made some arrangements to more bigger groups. But to me, one of the things that usually helped me in my creative process was I knew that if I spend a lot of time improvising around different ideas, somehow it was almost like I unlocked different ideas that then somehow correlated and ended up being this full piece that just formed based on these different improvisations. But I'm curious, do you think that has happened to you? Did improvisation helped you then being having it more easier? It made more easier to compose that part, or do you think it's not related at all?
So I would say that internal experience of improvising versus composing is very different, even though because improvisation, it's something that's happening in real time, right? If you're performing something by improvising, to me it's a very stressful experience. Even just being at a lesson with my teacher and okay, let's try to improvise on this chord, I feel arrested somehow. It's not it's very challenging to me in that regard. But even when I'm composing, so it happens both when I'm sitting at the piano, and then yes, I may improvise, and then whatever sticks I just put in the score, right? But usually it's a more kind of defined process. So as if there is already a melody or some kind of rhythmic pattern that exists, and then it enters my mind, and I know that it should be in the piece, right? And maybe it would be much more difficult to me for me to do it on the fly, because of my experience of improvisation as a stressful thing. But when I'm composing, I feel I have all the time that I need, and I just and then it somehow arises spontaneously. So I also find that things that end up in my scores, they don't just appear when I'm sitting at the piano and improvising, but sometimes, or actually oftentimes, it's like before I fall asleep, or when I'm walking on the street,
Yeah.
or I don't know, washing dishes or something like that.
Yeah.
So like it feels like my brain is just working in the background, and then suddenly it finds a solution, and then it appears in my consciousness. So
it's like the
yeah,
diffuse mode of the brain, right? Like I don't,
yeah,
it's like I
when
think
it's not under pressure.
yeah, it's like Barbara Oakland talks about that in the course, famous Coursera course, the learning how to learn, something like that. She talks about like how our brain, when you're doing other stuff, it makes all these unconscious connections, and then allows for a creative and spontaneous thing to arise. So
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense. So and that's basically that's your creative process, or do you have like any routines or anything that helps you get those ideas more often, or you just let it flow and end up writing what appears?
Yeah, so I don't really have a routine, to be honest. So it's not like, every morning at 9 a.m. I have to be at the
Yeah,
piano and write whatever it comes. And I know that this is this seems to be uh, something that a lot of the prominent artists and composers and writers have. Actually, I've been reading this book called Daily Habits: How Artists Work, and it appears that a lot of them, yeah, they did have fixed hours that they dedicated solely to writing without any distractions. And it can be like, usually for a lot of people it's morning, but then depending on their other jobs or other responsibilities, can be nighttime or something like that. But
yeah,
for me, yeah, I just um I don't have a routine, and I don't feel like I need it,
mm,
because when a thing has, if it's to be written, it will be written, you
mm,
know.
yeah,
But also I would say that I think there is like a lot of, again, background activity that's happening on my mind, even though I'm not actively consciously thinking about
mm-hmm,
the work that I'm working on right now. But also I would say that it matters what I listen to. So I kind of um, let's say I've been listening to those piano trios or string trios, just to get a sense of the structural possibilities,
yeah,
um, and what kind of story I want to tell, um, and how, in what ways instruments can interact with each other. So it's more like meta level kind of
yeah,
information.
yeah. Not
Even
not
though
so
I can
much.
enjoy,
Go ahead.
yeah, I can enjoy. I can, yeah, no. I can like greatly enjoy the music itself, like in Ravel's trio, or like Fauré or Shostakovich. Um, but I'm not I don't think, yeah, uh, I don't I don't use their musical ideas, right? I
Yeah,
have, yeah, I'm working in my own kind of
yeah,
space. Um, but oh, there's like one story that, like, it happened to me last fall, and like, this is to say that it really matters what I listen to,
yeah,
because there's sometimes, and again, this hasn't happened with classical music for me, but it happened with a soundtrack.
mm,
So I greatly enjoyed the movie Dune,
yeah,
and the score is magnificent. And I just, I download the soundtrack, I listen to it quite a lot of times, and then I realized that the piece I was writing, it's like, it's just me rephrasing the Dune soundtrack somehow. It's like it felt it, and like it was such an arresting feeling, because I thought, oh, I'm coming up with new ideas, and then when I look at it closely, oh, this is just something that rhymes with that phrase from the soundtrack or something like that. And it
yeah,
was really uh, counterproductive. It was a negative influence,
yeah,
actually. So again, I enjoyed that soundtrack, but then it somehow got in the way of my own writing.
yeah,
So I want to be pretty cautious with what I'm listening to while I'm writing.
yeah. Of course. Is there like
Yeah.
besides the other music? Is there like because you told like that you actually said that how you end up thinking about what kind of story do you want to tell, and like is there like how do you think about that? Do you try to, when you're composing, do you think about a specific story? And when I say story, I mean it can be just a set of emotions, or do you compose based on a specific idea of a story that you have in your mind, or is it just because I remember having this discussion with a bunch of friends, and like we had these completely different approaches. So a bunch of my friends would look into music and they would create like a sequence of chords, harmony, melody that that was right. And didn't actually tell a story. It was just that. And then what I usually tried to do was I would pick up on books or stories that I've read, and I would try to compose based on those. Now, I'm really curious about what do you mean by story? Do you actually think about a specific story, or is it just a metaphor? What do you think about when you're writing a piece?
Yeah, it can be more or less abstract, I would say, for different things that I have written or I'm writing right now. It can be at different levels of abstraction. So yeah, and those ideas can arise spontaneously, right? So one of my projects I'm working on right now is called Four Elements, and I conceived it as a pretty large work consisting of four movements, and each movement is one of the elements. So like water, fire, earth, and air. So already that gives you a lot of like rich context to how music may sound like, and even like, you know, it also tells me what kind of instrumentation I want to use, right? It will be very different from air versus earth, let's say, right? With earth, I imagine, oh, there's going to be some like a lot of percussion, and some rich kind of sounds. And then with the air, it has to be some voice piece with some string instruments or like with plucked strings. So like already that shapes what means you're going to use in the writing, right? So you know that idea came to me when I was thinking about. Yeah, I actually wanted to organize concerts around the time of spring equinox, which is celebrated in Azerbaijan as the New Year, Nowruz. It's also celebrated in other countries, and you know this tradition of Nowruz. It's also it includes celebrating those four elements.
Yeah.
So there are on the 4 Tuesdays that precedes spring equinox, there are celebrations dedicated to each of this elements. So yeah, I just thought about it and I thought, oh, this sounds like a piece of music. I could do something like that. And again, like the very nature, these are maybe like primal kind of elements in the sense that maybe you can find them in different pieces of music, and maybe they're just named differently, but they're like 4 temperaments, right? You can think of them as 4 temperaments or like 4 mental states or something like that. And then a couple of other pieces that I wrote, they arose as my tribute to Azerbaijani composers that I admire.
Yeah.
So I wrote 2 fugues whose subjects are based on the opening theme from a ballet or a symphonic Mugham. So like it's a wonderful melody, and then I feel like, oh, what if I elaborate on it, and like my thoughts naturally go to a fugue, right? And fugue it's more abstract. It's more about moods and interaction of voices. It's it's harder to think of it as a narrative in that sense. But also when I think about like works that consist of several parts, like several movements, then you can think about, oh, how those parts relate to each other, right? Contrast is a very powerful kind of tool, that you can use. So let's say like first movement is very energetic, and then it ends in a kind of fiery fashion, and then the next movement is very kind kind of stately or mournful, even like slow, like procession, and then you have again a more lively section followed by something where the piece kind of rounds up and peters out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in more abstract terms.
Okay.
It's less about let's say trying to. Actually, I want to experiment with scoring. Let's say scoring videos or short films or something like that. But at this point, the narrative that I'm thinking of is more abstract.
Yeah, perfect, great. So let's take a step back and like I'm really curious about what's your take on this. So we both talked about a little bit before about the visa meme, which is like the meme that originated all this podcast, this idea of a modern golden age, and you just said when we were talking that you believe that community was like or these kinds of relationship and discussions when we talk about intellect were part of this modern golden age, and to me that makes absolute sense. But also music is, at least to me, actually a great element of this modern golden age, because I believe that we need some songs and hymns and overall pieces of music that somehow connect us and allow us to have like this shared idea of and art in general. We need art in general to get to a stage in humanity where we actually are living with some different values or treating the planet in another way. And I was really curious to ask you two things about this topic of the modern golden age. The first one is, what is to you like the modern golden age? How you see that idea, and also what's the role that you think music will play in that same idea?
Yeah, this is a huge topic, of course, and I think there are so many people who are undiscovered, and I really want them to be discovered. And for me personally, it was like a fateful encounter, right? I wish that there were more excuses, or more, not even excuses, but more structures in the world, or things that allow this fateful encounters to happen, and then help those people who, like, again, like even like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine that I would be able to write music, right? It took meeting people who I admired and who were inspiring to me to take this step. It's about access to the resources, with access to people, and being in like nurturing environment where what you do matters, what you say matters, and just like, I think talent search in that sense, and creating spaces where people can connect are for sure like one of the major components of bringing about the golden age. Because I feel like there's so much already in place for it to happen, but it's more like about connecting dots, connecting people to the right resources, and like and like, it can be at different scales also, right? I think we're a little bit obsessed with, look at the example of Athens, look at the example of Florence or Vienna. Those were like kind of bright examples of where what we now see as golden age happened, right? There's also like a bit of retrospective view, right? And maybe we are already in it, in our golden age, which people from 100 years from now would see it as. But I think there's still so much undiscovered diamonds in the rough, that they just need someone to encourage them. I think also this is a subject that comes up a lot in Visa's threads and also generally on Twitter, at least in this corner of Twitter, that it really matters when people encourage you. Because even if you're doing something that's cool, you might not be even aware of it.
Yeah.
and like, it's important. Yeah, I mean, it's great to do things for their own sake, right? To be kind of self-sufficient in that regard, that finding joy in what you're doing, and you know, not relying on external encouragement or something like that. But more often than not, it's really important, not just to be encouraged by other people, but also feel like what you're doing matters. That it also can bring joy to other people, whether it's music that you're writing, or the handcraft that you're making, or you're teaching, or just about everything. And yeah, of course, this is very tightly connected to the education and education systems, where like, I feel like I just spent a lot of time optimizing for wrong things, to be honest. Like, I loved studying. I was just insatiable for knowledge, but then I had to kind of spend my time doing things that in the end didn't matter, but they were required by the educational system to pass. Whereas I could spend like so much time just like, just freestyling, like exploring whatever I'm interested in, plus having people I could talk about that with, right? So again, the subject of tutoring comes up, and this is also, if you like do a historical analysis of the past golden ages, this is something that comes up, that like a lot of the most brilliant people that we now see as geniuses, they have been tutored, or at least had some kind of unstructured education that wasn't confined by the formal education. So yeah, like a lot of components, right? And I feel like a lot of the things already exist in place, but it's about distribution, or about connection. Yeah, about the connection.
Because I'm totally on board on that. In fact, like, I believe that we will get there by there's a set of specific, which I don't know what are those, but there are a set of specific, at least I believe, of specific values and beliefs and practices and goals that, in order for us to get to a modern golden age, we need to somehow share. And what I do believe is that there's a lot of people that already share those, but somehow we are still not connected with each other. And like, I when I was starting this podcast, I always thought that, well, I need to have like this clear vision of what the modern golden age is, so I can talk about it. Then I decided that, who am I to just make that vision? I have no idea, but what I can do is to connect people that somehow share with this, and maybe together we can build like this vision that will be far more complete and far better than what I can do, right? And so what you're talking about, like the fact that we can make connections with people that somehow share those values, like supporting each other, or practices like supporting each other, like sharing ideas, like building different connections and projects, and yeah, having like these different communities that somehow can help us craft a bigger vision than what we already have. And in some place, I believe as well that we're already in this golden age. So let's not call it maybe modern, but we need to connect with each other in order to build that vision. And so just to go back, like, what do you think will be the role of music in this endeavor?
Yeah, this, one thing about history of music is that it feels like all the big names are in the past somehow. And in our time, there are just like incredibly admirable performers, some of whom also compose, but again, I can't think of a a recent work of the 21st century that would have such a incredibly strong emotional effect on me as music from Baroque or like even 20th century has had on me. And I puzzle over this. I don't quite understand what is it that I'm talking about classical music, right? Because in other genres, you can also talk about stagnation, or it is as if we are recycling things that were in the past. It's not like things are completely novel at any time in history. They always draw on what has come before, but sometimes they feel like a huge jump forward, right? Or they strike you as something novel, or a new voice, like a new composer who has a very distinct voice that we recognize, among thousands of others. And I'm thinking now that maybe places where breakthroughs can happen are at the boundaries between different genres that probably haven't met before, right? I guess that's why I'm
that's what you're
personally
doing.
I feel exhilarated about it, because just like the very process of I'm not even talking about the result or how many people will listen to it eventually. It's like it's secondary, but the very fact of creating something that's at the boundary of two things that haven't mixed before, or not as much, it's incredibly fulfilling. Right. And I think there are a lot of interesting things that can happen at these boundaries that don't really know each other yet as much. Right. It doesn't, I mean, maybe you can't mix everything with everything else, but there are some tasteful combinations that I think are yet to be discovered, or maybe they are being developed, but we don't know much about them yet. I feel like that's where a big potential lies. And again, this is about connecting people. And I think with music, it's apologies.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
It's more about like discoverability, right? Then because we can stream anything at any time with the tools that we have. So we can explore, I don't know, folk recordings from late 19th century, when recording became possible, up to, or even like how they are enacted in this day. I think folk music still, as it has been a cradle for music, for composed music, it is still like a inexhaustible source of new ideas that can be reimagined or like reformulated or somehow modified to bring about a thing of beauty. So I think it's about discovering new things and then trying to create potions, mixtures of things that haven't been put together before.
So I definitely agree on that, and with that, and in fact, I actually believe that whole approach is actually something that it makes sense to this modern golden age, not only in music but in all these different areas. In fact, one of the things that I'm fascinated about is like how some people mix two seemingly different areas or contexts and somehow mix them all up in the same worldview. Like I remember that when I changed, in fact, I even wrote about this. Like when I moved from music to starting to do some corporate training and all that, and entrepreneurship and all that stuff. I remember a lot of people asking me like, don't you feel bad about wasting all that time studying music? And my answer was always the same, which is I don't see it as wasted time. Like there's a bunch of lessons that I've learned while learning how to improvise, how to read music, how to play with musicians, how to all that. Those are really valuable lessons in these other contexts. And so I do believe that in order for us to get to a modern golden age, we definitely need to do more of that, like mix your different areas that seemingly were opposites, and create something which is more complete. And in that sense, doing a segue, that's what you do, because you have like, we only talked about music so far, and but I really want to touch a little bit on the other topic, which is basically your full-time job, and your other focus, which is biology. And so my question would be, what are some of those like connections between these two areas, that how how do they complement each other? Like, what music as taught you about biology, and maybe what biology is, as or how do they resonate in each other? Am I making sense? Am I is the question clear?
Yeah, yeah, totally clear. It's just, I think, um, what biology teaches you is that um, structures of life are incredibly complex, and
Mm,
they are fractally complex. So you can think of an ecosystem, you can think of separate ecological niches, then you can think about populations of organisms, species, then you can think about individuals, like an organism, and then you can go deep into the organism, like its organs, tissues, cell types, then subcellular structure. So it goes all the way down to, molecules.
mm,
Um, so yeah, it definitely gives you an appreciation of the diversity of structures and how they are nested within each other and how they connected to each other. Um, so I'm really glad that I chose biology as my um, yeah, as my research area. Specifically, it was neuroscience and developmental
yeah.
neurobiology. Um, but I'd say, yeah, maybe like it helps me understand a little bit better how music cognition happens.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I'd say the structural aspect and cognitive aspect is what is where I see some crossovers between
yeah.
biology and music. Um, but I don't think they necessarily have to be even connected.
Yeah, yeah.
You can have like just a fascination and interest in things that, yeah, may not have much to do with each other. But I do think that, in terms of like this structural aspect and our own, yeah, understanding our own perception of music, uh, there are lessons to be drawn from biology.
Yeah, because I wasn't, maybe I, not maybe, I definitely wasn't clear, because my point is that we don't have to have a direct relationship. I asked if those happen, but I do believe that somehow you have insight from biology and insight from music that you use in your own worldview, right? And they complement each other.
Mm.
That's what I
Mm.
mean. Yeah. So just a bunch of more questions. Like, what you said that you were, there was a moment where you had like music and sciences together, and you were drawn to science. Like, what draws you to sciences, and specifically to neurobiology? Like, what do you enjoy in that area?
Yeah, I think again, this is just like an insatiable urge to know how things work. I cannot break it down to any like more
Mm,
elementary, I guess, parts. It's just like a
yeah.
desire to know. And just like, I went to college in Moscow at Moscow State University, and I just remember to this day being like just listening to lectures was like eyes wide open and almost jaw dropped, um, just because of the things I was hearing. That,
Hmm.
oh, I had no idea things work this way, and not only is it amazing how they work, but also it's amazing how we came to understand how they work.
Mm,
So there's always like this like two levels of like um, astonishment, right? First of all, we're told what are all these parts of the cell, or how uh, you know gene expression is regulated, or
mm,
how um, yeah how neurons connect us to the external world and make us respond to it. So there's this first level of, oh, I'm absorbing this information and it blows me away, and then I'm thinking, well, how on earth people have figured this out, and then that's like more of a history of science, which is also an incredible topic. And I guess for me, it kind of goes hand in hand, like research and then history of science, history of research, and then philosophy of science. I think, yeah, actually, I wish there were more emphasis on both history and philosophy of science for graduate students or just like anyone who's studying these subjects. There's a lot to learn from it.
Yeah. So you just made me realize an insight, which is like most people that I want to have on the podcast, and most people I believe are somehow connected with this, do share what you just called, and I love it, the desire to know, like this extreme curiosity about how the world works, and even if totally different areas, like you have biology, some other people that I want to share have like all that interest in all these different areas. So maybe curiosity is also a pillar of this modern golden age that we're seeking. Yeah. So Ulkar, I'm out of questions, and I really enjoyed. I do want to ask you one last question though, which is, if people want to follow you online or connect with you, what are some of the best places to do, and where they can learn and hear, actually listen to your music? Tell us a little bit about that before we go.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and I'm very happy there in my corner of people that I really enjoy interacting with and I learn a lot from. So it's just my first name underscore last name. That's my handle. And I also have a YouTube channel where I post recordings of my music, and that's also under my name. Yeah, I also started writing a blog. It's not yet, yeah, it doesn't have many entries yet, but I definitely want to, devote more time and effort in it going forward.
Yeah. So there you go. We'll leave all those links in description, as well as all the pieces that you mentioned throughout the way. I'll ask you the links for those so we can add them to. And Ulkar, once again, thank you so much for coming. It was a real pleasure to have that conversation. To everyone listening, you can subscribe to the podcast in your favorite streaming platforms, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely.